Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly Ag Weather Update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. Well, we're out of October, so I thought we'd just get a quick look at some of the statistics. We'll do precip first and then temperature. I show these maps to you quite a bit. Remember, we're looking here at ranks. So total precipitation ranks by climate district. There's 129 years in this data set. The closer you are to number one, the wettest. Now, before we talk about the fact that we've actually been quite dry inside of this area here, just take note here that harvest efforts across much of the Corn Belt, the whole of it practically here, have been really slow. So we're expecting with the drier weather we're going to get this week to see a lot more progress. Outside of that, the West, specifically Northern California into Nevada, extremely wet into this area, bringing up lake levels. For example, Lake Oroville, which is inside that circle I just drew there, up 30 feet just in the last 15 days or so. But as we take note here, this has been an area that's largely been missed by some of these recent weather systems. We've been dry here and also been dry in the lower Mississippi River Valley in places, and then dry in the higher plains, although it's snowing in parts of the high plains this morning. Now, when you look at this next map, which shows temperatures, just understand something that the first 3 weeks of the month didn't look like the very end of the month. But in addition to being quite dry, we were also very warm. It's going to end up being a top 10 warmest October on record here, kind of in the northeastern sections of North Carolina, getting into Virginia here, and then through the Ohio River Valley, and up toward the eastern Great Lakes. Very, very warm October. Now, this pattern has since done a little bit of a reset, but I'm going to talk to you in a few moments about what I'm thinking for the longer range. And next week, on Monday, I will have brand new all long-range seasonal forecast data, and we'll take another look at winter. So I got all that coming up partly today and then next week. One last thing to kind of cap off this is let's look at soil moisture in the latest drought monitor. Because as we take a look at the top 16 inches or 40 centimeters, you can see the high plains are dry. We can see that there's pockets throughout North and South Carolina that are dry. But get over the Appalachian Mountains and we're saturated in parts of Tennessee. And we're saturated in the Northeast. And again, much of the Corn Belt here quite wet for this time of year. So just another bit of perspective here. And I want to show you the latest drought monitor update because we do have across parts of North Carolina the first two stages of drought that have set in. And we're just going to be concerned about what this is going to look like, this whole area as we progress through the upcoming cold season. So basically November through March. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the risk we have for drought there, and I'll cover that just in a few moments here. But still a substantial portion of the United States, despite some of the recent rains, still in that long-term drought category. And while we do expect a lot of decrease in drought area in the Pacific Northwest, Southern California, from basically, I'll just say from here over to Texas, we are on the lookout for this winter for drought development in this area. And unfortunately, we're also on the lookout for it in parts of North Carolina. So I'm going to cover that in just a few seconds. Big picture in the near term. Now, over the next 5 days, we got some pretty cold air that's going to be coming through our region, and you can see here that our frost potential, this map just kind of shows where we expect to see temperatures at or below freezing over the next 7 days. And now we start to see some of those, that colder air getting, almost to Raleigh here. So we could get some our first frost of the year coming through. That'd be, close to right about on time for the western half of North Carolina, western half of Virginia. And so this colder air that's coming through, we wouldn't really call it unseasonable at this point. But how long does it stick around? Well, this is day 5 through 10. So we're going to actually go through the first 10 days of November with a cooler bias. But look at the warmth that's surging back here into the midsection of the country. Big reason for that? High pressure is building in right here. And in the northern hemisphere, let's draw that again. Just remember that the flow around a high pressure center is clockwise. That's due to something called the Coriolis effect. And therefore, if you start to draw southerly winds here, we're going to warm this section of the North America back up, but we're going to get the colder air coming around the northern side of this. One last thing, this is what our precipitation pattern is going to look like. We're going to be drier. So you can see here that we're not expecting much precipitation at all. A little bit of rain coming maybe this Thursday for parts of North Carolina, but we're not talking about much at all. So generally speaking, compared to our climatological average, we're going to be pretty dry compared to normal. While the west is getting hit again hard and this front slides into the south, this pattern is going to favor a lot of upper level convergence in the flow. And I'm going to talk to you about that in just a few seconds. Now, the second half of October, so the 15th through the end of the month, this is what the jet stream pattern tended to do. very strong coming across the Pacific, and it curled up just like this. And there was a big ridge of high pressure sitting here, okay? Now what that did was that gave us very weak flow across much of the south, southeast, mid-south, but we did occasionally get these systems that kind of came out through the Corn Belt in the mid-south. But over us, we had very weak flow at the jet stream level winds. Now what's going to happen here in the next several days is, let's blow this up, take a closer look. This is what I'm anticipating the jet stream doing. Going from Monday into Tuesday, let's just park this right here about Wednesday afternoon. Jet stream really coming fast through the Gulf of Alaska. It then breaks up into a ridge like this, and the other piece dives down here into Texas. It all kind of comes back together right in through here, but what you end up getting, can you kind of see how the flow splits and then comes back together? In addition to the split flow coming back together, there is also a lot of upper level convergence. I'll put a big C on it. And what that means is that C represents where the air is basically, we call it mass convergence. It's coming together aloft. It's forced to then subside or come down, subsidence. It sinks in the atmosphere. And that tends to produce a very large area of high pressure. And that high pressure is going to move with the flow over here to the Carolinas throughout the next several days. So what ends up happening is by Thursday into Friday, the flow is doing something like that. There's the southern branch, and the northern branch is here. And this is just not a pattern where through the next week or so we would expect to see precipitation. So if we put it all together, let's just go straight to the high-res European. I can play this pretty fast. Ready? Monday into Tuesday, and there might be some showers up on the Appalachian Mountains here. Tuesday afternoon in Virginia, West Virginia, but not North Carolina. As we then go through Wednesday, there's the wetter weather that's on the southern edge of the colder air that's coming down. And then from Wednesday into Thursday, I think Thursday is going to be our best chance at getting some rain this week. But watch, pushed out pretty quickly there by Friday afternoon. And then we go into the weekend with high pressure kind of dominating our area. Now, the operational European model, if I just keep playing this out through next weekend into early next week, it's just got the high pressure parked over us. So this would suggest that through most of the next 10 days, outside of a chance at some precip on Thursday this week, we're going to be looking overall relatively dry. So I can stack all that up for you and just play forward here the precipitation. So what we see here is that through Wednesday, that only chance that we could possibly get us some very, very light precipitation was on Tuesday, right? But it wasn't much. But watch, as we go through the day on Thursday, I'll just kind of rock back and forth on the day Thursday, and we've got a better chance at seeing some rainfall, really focused over the Appalachian Mountains. But then, not much adding to it as we go out here. Now, in the tropics, we got a system way out in the North Atlantic called Wanda. That means we've now exhausted our entire name list for tropical cyclones this year, but I don't see anything brewing in the Gulf or in the Atlantic that could affect this as well. So I just want to give you a quick tropical update there. So that's it. That's your next 10 days of precip. Now, what I'll be curious to see is this. Starting on day 10, which is November the 11th, the models want to take those deeper troughs in the west that keeping the western United States so wet and sweep them through. See that? Now remember, just a bit of meteorology 101. This is what a trough looks like in terms of the flow. You always divide them up in the middle. And what we teach our students is put a D here and a C there. So this is kind of meteorology 101. Upper level flow, divergence leads to wetter weather. Convergence leads to drier weather. So always on the eastern side of troughs across North America, we have better chances of rainfall. So what I see here is once we get out past the 12th, 13th, and 14th, you see how the trough is sweeping toward us? So what you're going to see in the models is, starting on this is a week-long anomaly, so just see that. Day 4 through 10, that 7-day time period, we're still drier. But as we play it forward, you're going to watch the drier colors represented in those brown colors fade as we get out there toward the 12th, 13th, and 14th, suggesting that we could see an increase in precipitation going back over toward what we would kind of call here normal. All right. So that means while we're drier through the next 10 days, mid-month, I think we're going to start to see some better chances for precip. And of course, I'll have an update about that next week. Okay, from here, let's talk temperatures. I'm going to get straight into high temperatures because you've already seen the extent of the frost. We're right kind of bang on climatological averages today on Monday. But as you know, we got colder air coming in. There's Tuesday's highs getting into Wednesday. Now we're looking at temperatures that could be 7 to 10 degrees colder than normal. Some places maybe even colder than that. Going into Thursday, high of 49 in Raleigh, I mean, that's going to be a chilly day on Thursday, but that's when we expect the cloud cover and rain. Friday's high, 50 in the center of the state, going into Saturday and Sunday. So we got a cold week that's on tap. And as I showed you at the beginning, it's not really going anywhere. Day 5 through 10, we got the remainder of that cooler time period because the high pressure is sitting over us. Where the pattern begins to moderate is out there day 10 through 15, middle of the month. So remember we saw middle of the month, the trough approaching from the west, which means out ahead of it, we get the southerly flow and the warm up that you see here, okay? Now, we just quickly went through the next 15 days. What I want to get to is the longer range. And this is where I think the source of a lot of our forecast variability is coming from. I know these are ugly graphics, but they tell us a lot. It's the MJO. Okay, front half of October, it was here, phases 5 and 6. It then dashed straight through the middle, we call this the null space, and popped out in phase 1, 2, right here. Now, what does all that mean? Well, this is over by Australia, getting into the Western Pacific. Normally, the MJO, if I just draw a line here, it kind of goes around the diagram like this, and it may take about 6 weeks to make a complete loop. And as it does so, it just tells us where we're taking energy in the form of moisture and heat out of the tropics and shoving it into the North Pacific jet stream. So it affects North American weather. Now, because it spent so much time here in October, came here at the end of October, we expected it to pop out and move like this, but it's not going to do that. It's going to try to come right back across and set up again where it was at the beginning of October. And that's why when we see this, it ends up doing this to our temperature pattern. Now, this would be the end of October through the end. This is a 30-day sliding window. What you see though is that we go into November. Watch the moderation occur. See the temperature starting to warm back up? I'll just stop it right, I don't know, here. This would be November 10 through December the 10th, that 30-day time period. And you can almost see how it goes back into that reset mode where all the action's in the west. There's warmer conditions in the midsection of the country. We're hanging on toward probably closer to average temperatures, but no real sign of significant cold air coming through. But then as we get out there toward the end of December, or excuse me, the middle of December, this is going to suggest that the temperature pattern will likely be more volatile than what the maps are showing you here. So I wouldn't rest at all on this forecast. I don't like it in terms of the temperature pattern. We will get shots at warmer days, but don't expect it to get stuck like it did all of October. I think because the MJO is going to be doing a whole lot more moving back and forth between these two phases, we're going to see our temperature pattern get set up for about 8 to 10 days one way and then flip over to the other mode the next 8 to 10 days. I would just bank on like an 8 to 10 day window of similar weather conditions followed by the opposite following 8 to 10 days. That makes sense? That's what I think is going to happen because of the movement of the MJO. What about the precipitation pattern? Well, unfortunately, this continues to favor more drier conditions for us. See that? It's not going to be an outlook for November and early December that's going to favor above normal conditions. And I want to talk to you about that as we wrap this up. Because a lot of this, I think, is tied to the fact that our La Nina is really gathering a lot of strength. Not only do we have the cold water here, and I showed you last week that there's a lot of cold water underneath this as well that's going to upwell to the surface. But we've got a cold extension here and a lot of cold water in the North Pacific. Now, why I'm so keen on this, why we're talking about it, is because right out there in the central Pacific on the equator, the average ocean temperature has just continued to drop. So as I stated, this La Nina is getting stronger. Now, I've done this for you many times, so let's review this. When you look during our cold season, December through February, at the relationship between the temperatures there and what we call Niño region 3.4. Again, that is this area right here, those ocean temperatures, okay? That's a big area, by the way. We find that there's a positive correlation with the temperatures there. What that means is if it was El Nino, we'd be wet all along the southeast through the Carolinas to the mid-Atlantic. But we don't have that, which means the red colors represent drier conditions. So as long as that La Nina continues to strengthen and form, we would not expect an above average winter. And that's why I'm so concerned by the fact that we've got drought developing in this area. Now I want to show you what I did with this. I went back, and there's one of my favorite websites. It's called Climate at a Glance. If you Google Climate at a Glance and go to the NOAA link, you'll get here. I selected statewide, time series, so that and that. I looked at precipitation over the 3 months ending in February, And I wanted a time series for North Carolina from 1970 to 2021. I then said display a trend on this from 1970 to 2021, and I click plot. And this is what I get. Now, this shows us every single winter what our precipitation has looked like back to 1970. And there's actually a blue line on there. See that? That's the trend. The trend is basically flat. What I then did was down here, that's actual data. So I clicked on rank, and it put them in order of driest to wettest. And I wanted to know what happened in these driest 10 years, because I want to know what to be on the lookout for. So here's the first thing. Oh, let's shrink that up a little bit. Watch for a big ridge here and a big ridge there, because whenever we tend to get that, we also tend to get ridging in this area. Now, why is this all so important? Well, if we tend to get these three ridges in these places, so think Texas, New Mexico, south of Iceland, south of Alaska, what we end up getting in terms of the flow of the jet stream is something like this. Now, just take a moment, let your eyes adjust. High pressure tends to sit here, and the flow tends to come around it just like that. Now, this is high pressure at the jet stream level. Sorry, it's off the screen there. Jet stream level, okay? Now, what that ends up doing, just like we talked about, is the flow comes down like this. And you get a lot of upper level subsidence and convergence. And what that leads us to is drier conditions. That tends to happen most often when the ocean temperatures here are cool. They're cooler in through there and really cool in the central Pacific Ocean. Now you see how we've got that going on right now. That's why every long-range model suggests that. In addition to that, we also tend to get, whenever we have this particular setup, a lot wetter conditions in Brazil. And I'm going to talk to you about that in just a few seconds. So it's interesting. When Brazil tends to be wet, we tend to be dry. It all seems to be driven by the same thing. Now, before I show you Brazil, I want to come back to this graphic. Now, December through February. If this fails, the whole thing is out the window. That ridge right there is the setup for all the downstream path of the flow here that gives us upper level convergence and drier winter conditions. So this is what I'm going to watch most carefully, and I want you to watch it with me. What could mess that up, even though there's a La Nina? The MJO. If the MJO continues just to pump momentum out of the tropics, making the jet stream fast in through here, we got better chances of those systems ejecting into the plains, giving us better chances of wintertime precipitation. On the flip side of this, if we can end up developing troughs in this area because of that, all right, we tend to get a lot more systems that form along the coast and those big nor'easters, which deliver a lot of winter precipitation. No, they're not fun to endure, but they at least keep us away from drought during winter. We're going to watch that. That's what I want you to watch with me, I guess I should say. And I'm going to finish with South America. Because right now, due to that same thing going on with La Nina, over the next 10 days, much of southern Brazil is going to be dry. Now, planting progress in Mato Grosso, which you could fit 4 North Carolinas inside of Mato Grosso. That's this state right here. It's a huge one. They are screaming with planting of soybeans, and they're really moving quickly in eastern Brazil. They moved early in southern Brazil, but the risk longer term is going to be for drier conditions in southern Brazil. That line of distribution goes from Mato Grosso do Sul through Rio Grande do Sul. And I'm concerned about the eastern half of Argentina's growing area developing drought later. I'll keep you posted on all of this every week in my reports, and I'll talk to you next Monday. Thanks.